Now it is. So what's the relationship between this activity and co-mediation? What's the, what are some of the lines here? You were already reading this.
Yeah. In this thing, we started and nothing was happening. So I had this idea of a spiral, so I just went and didn't resist, so I just did it. And when we got to the edge of the paper, I thought, well, that was 2 seconds and I think we're done. I couldn't see because of the hands. So whatever he wanted to do, I just followed, like he did in the first half. So he, you know, that was sort of in my blind spot. So I think that's the same thing in mediation, is someone else can pick it up when it's sort of in your blind spot or you're not connecting or something.
Hi, Scott. Welcome.
But we did have the nonverbal. We'd look at each other.
Sure.
You know.
Make decisions together. How else might this be related to co-mediation or to using your skills in tandem?
I think it's a really gentle and trusting process. You know, I think where it worked really well was when we were both, you know, kind of just really, it wasn't even tentative, but it was kind of just very gentle, considerate, and we just kind of flowed. And then there were moments when we were flowing together, and it just, you know, was like, cool. This is.
Some moments of flow. Did anybody experience not a moment of flow where you felt at odds, or you were like, ooh, I'm not sure?
A certain amount of figuring. I felt there was a certain amount of just trying to figure out the process, and that if we knew each other better and had done it, we would have a better sense of how to work together. But I do think it makes you aware of what the person's where the person's trying to go, and trying to get a feel for that and respond and react to it.
It seemed that, oh, I'm sorry. No, go ahead. But I would say, not unlike mediation too, I didn't have any like preconceived like goal where it was going to go, and was just kind of following it where it went, kind of sharing the helm, so to speak, but in the same respect, like not saying like, we're going to make a house, you know, beforehand, because we didn't know what, you know, where.
No end product in mind, but a shared contribution. You're both contributing to.
There was no CCR model.
Sorry.
There was no CCR model to follow.
Oh, that's true.
I thought it was kind of backwards in several ways. The only thing useful I could see in it was trying to, with the mediator, try to get in tune with what is a co-mediator interested in doing, just like you would in a mediation. But I think you ought to start at the beginning of, why the heck are we here? What are we trying to do? In any mediation, it's kind of a first place, because then you have to work off of where you're trying to get to on the continuum.
The idea here, I think, picking up on what Joe was saying, is that sometimes we, you know, in the CCR model of mediation, we don't have an end product in mind. And when there are two mediators working together, we hope that the experience is in many ways intuitive, that the two of you can use sort of nonverbal skills and use your trust, and when necessary, use sort of like a caucus, or there's other kinds of tools we're going to talk to you about, to communicate with your partner, so that you're both contributing to a shared vision, where sometimes you're both kind of managing things and you're both in control. Sometimes you're fully taking control. Sometimes you're giving up control. And that really permits you to create something, whatever your image was. I'm sorry, Mark.
I was just going to say, I think we both, I think, realized right off the bat, if we both tried to be in control, it wasn't going to work out. So, you know, there had to be, you know, some way of kind of
accommodation.
Yeah, I think that's
deference, accommodation. Sometimes when I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. I was just gonna say, I anticipate, I don't know anything about co-mediation, but I anticipate that there's a lot of nonverbal communication that has to go on, especially when you have parties in the room. You can't always say, okay, what are we gonna do next, what are we gonna do next? So a lot of it's gonna be kind of body language and understanding through nonverbal.
That's right, yeah. So intuition helps, trust in your mediator, letting things go. We'll talk more about tips as we go through tonight. Sometimes when we do this activity, if we see lots of curly cues like this, that means that there's a lot of trust between the two people. Maybe not a lot of direction. Sometimes when we see lots of angles, That's a lot of direction without perhaps a lot of trust. Does that make sense? Because I'm directing us this way and then I stop. And then you're directing us this way and then we both stop. And then I'm directing us this way and then we both stop. So we need a balance. So when I see things like Jane and Kent, you have kind of a nice balance of those curly cues and those things. So, I mean, that's just a general observation from doing this a lot of times. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Thank you for humoring me.
That's a great metaphor.
All right. So Cookie and I are here to talk to you about co-mediation and some of the benefits, its challenges, and its potential use in CCR. We know some of you might have experience with co-mediation, so we hope to elicit some of your experiences and
Am I blocking people? Am I in? No, okay, my
and your thoughts with it. So my goals for the session tonight are laid out on your agenda. We hope that you'll understand and be able to articulate the benefits, the features, and the challenges of co-mediation. We hope that you'll have some skills. You'll be able to develop some skills in working in a co-mediation model in practice. The last thing is that we're hoping to get some feedback and input from you, our volunteer community, as to whether and how CCR could implement co-mediation here. It's something I'm interested in, Cookie's been interested in for a long time. This is our opportunity to really get feedback and input from you, whether you think it's a terrible idea, it's a waste of CCR's resources. So we hope that as those things kind of bubble up for you, those questions, that you share them with us as we're going and after the session. So we'll kind of conduct this in a question and answer format. We'll start with questions. What is co-mediation? And then we'll kind of offer our responses to these questions. So what do we mean by co-mediation? What does it mean?
You got two mediators.
Two mediators. Yep. Two or more mediators on how many cases? One case. So it's a single mediation case, more than one mediator. Yep.
What do you mean one case?
Well, working on one dispute. So it could,
One dispute can be multiple cases and multiple people in it.
multiple parties. Is that what
Multiple
you're-
parties.
Same case. But it may be one case that they're working.
Or it can
So
be
let's say
multiple
it's
cases
CCR.
and multiple parties,
Absolutely
all at
true.
the same time.
You mean
But in the
concurrently?
context here.
Yeah, concurrent.
Concurrently?
Yeah, do it all at the same time.
Because I guess you could
I
have.
know
well, we
some
might
mediator
have a bunch of
mediate
co-mediations
first half.
going
I had a
on.
CCR one, we did that. There was 3 different parties, 4 different lawsuits or arbitrations. This was Mike Nathanson.
Wow.
It would probably be a really useful thing to do for a case that complex.
Well, particularly the more complex it gets, the more co-mediation on a continuum has the advantage, because there's too many balls in the air at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And actually, just to go back to that, if you, one of the very early community mediation centers is the San Francisco Community Boards. Probably started around the time we started, I don't know, somewhere back in the 70s. And their model, I don't know if they still use it, but back then was to actually have a panel, like I think of 5 mediators. If anybody knows differently, let me know, because this is what I remember. So they'd have 5 mediators and everybody'd have a different role. You know, somebody might go out into the community and collect information, somebody else might be the note taker, somebody might be, you know, the lead mediator, but they did it with more than 2. So it'd be interesting to see. I've never sort of seen how that works, but they've been around for decades. So basically, what does it look like? Different models. Has anybody had experience with different models of co-mediation?
I did one for CCR with Julie Stratton, and it was a community mediation in Beverly at a street that people were at each other's throats. There were about 30 families on a double street. And basically, I called people ahead of time to get the lay of the land. And then Julie and I decided that we would meet. There were definitely 2 sides in this, and it was racial. And so then we met with both, or met with one group, another group, and then we brought them together. But they were on 3 different nights. But when we were together with them, even though I was the one that did the pre-calling and getting the issues, etc., we sat opposite each other, And there were,
Excuse me, you
in the
said opposite
final
each other?
mediation, there was a group of about 20 people.
Did you stop there at the, we sat opposite each other, the two groups
No,
sat?
no, just,
Groups opposite.
we were in a big circle
Okay.
and in a room this big. And Julie would sat on one
One
side.
side, you were on the other of the circle.
Can you just talk a little bit about why you said it? We're sort of jumping over some other things, but just out of curiosity, how did you decide to sit opposite rather than next to each other? Or what was the decision in there?
Felt right.
Intuition, that's a big-
And we could have eye contact, and at least one person could have eye contact. Every
Also would make
party
some of the
would
people
have
feel-
somebody
yeah.
looking.
Yeah.
Did you have all of one group in one semicircle?
No,
all the other group
no,
in the other?
we-
You
no,
mixed them all up?
we mixed them up. And we got together ahead of time and scripted the first part of it, you know, the opening statements. And we were told by CCR, try anything. You don't have to use our model. And so we had people tell stories. First, tell some story, tell one story about your life that for people to know you, they'd have to know that story about you, that
Oh, that's
event in your
wonderful.
life. And we participated too.
Mhm.
We told stories for us, and they liked it so much we did a second story. And then we started going to the issues.
So you had a
But we were,
relationship.
Julie and I were talking equally.
Mm-hmm.
I set up the story thing, she gave the opening statement.
So they could see you sort of as equals in the process.
Yeah, but part of it was that we agreed that we would be vulnerable with them. And I had been brought up in the community, and I talked about a fight that I got in when I was bullied and stuff. And she talked about what it was like to be an African American in a tough situation.
So that's what
like
you
they
mean by
were in.
vulnerable, showing vulnerable?
Can
That's
you
what
just
meant by
speak a
showing
little bit louder?
I'm sorry, is that what you meant by showing vulnerability?
Yes.
Okay.
So again, an interesting way, number one, of where you seated each other, and also your decision together to see where to seat the parties in terms of mixing them up among one another, which is very interesting. But also, again, we've done it at CCR, it's not our normal model, but where co-mediators might divide up tasks like talking in, especially large group mediations, of interviewing people in advance to sort of see what their issues are or how they see the dispute. So again, very creative ways to use the process.
The other thing we did is we drove there together. You know, I picked her up at her house and we drove in, so we talked and.
So that preparation time,
Yeah,
definitely.
but more than just on the phone, etc.
Any other experiences? Joe?
I did one for CCR in the fall with Rebecca Zuber, and it was with a nonprofit in the northern suburbs. And it was like a department of 8 people, and there was all sorts of departmental strife. And they had reached out to CCR to see if we could help. So we split them up into groups of 4 for intake calls, so to speak. And we just had confidential, probably half-hour-long calls with each of them, just letting them kind of lay out what they thought the issues in the department were. And then after we had kind of gotten all that done, she and I got together and kind of put a summary of each of them together we had, and then we kind of established an agenda from there. Because we really only had like 3.5 hours. We didn't want to occupy a lot of the time kind of doing opening statements from 8 people.
Because they know their
Right.
opening statements.
So we laid out an agenda that we had on, like a flipboard and walked them through it in generic terms. Where, we obviously weren't saying, Steve said so, Mary's always, whatever. But we got buy-in on the agenda, had them all kind of ask any questions they could about it, add anything, subtract, which they did a little tweaking of, and then got into the issues. We sat like this, and it was like a horseshoe like this. And it was, we had kind of laid out how we would talk through the agenda, but from there we just kind of, we basically winged it. We know each other pretty well, so we were pretty comfortable.
In hindsight, do you think you would have done better if you were opposite sides of the circle?
We had a fairly long discussion about whether we would do that, like whether we wanted to sit where we could see each other so we could kind of,
right,
or whether we would kind of sit together where we,
but also
we
you
could still
be
kind
in the group, or whether you wanted to be separate.
Right, I mean, it was fairly, yeah, we weren't so separate that it worked pretty well. I think that it could work just as well the other way, though. Like we talked about afterwards, because that was one of our debates. Like, how do we structure ourselves in the room?
I think one of the things that comes to mind when you're talking about this is that when you have somebody to talk to and plan, you can be very creative in how you approach things. I mean, and Matt can talk more to this. We have our CCR model, but sometimes in some of these cases, it takes some different, sort of tweaking to do the case. So in some ways, I think that's what makes mediation fun, is that you can try new things to see what works and what doesn't work. And
watch another mediator. That was
right.
That was the best part for me. I mean, the whole thing was really cool, but she did a couple things that were really, really great in it that like really helped kind of open my eyes to how just simple things that you think about that in the moment I couldn't do, and she did. So it was, that's a benefit, obviously, is that you've got two people kind of, using whatever skills they have.
We're going to talk more about that. That's a major benefit, I think, to the mediation process. If you look at how people do it in different ways, there's a million different ways you can do the sort of the model. One is a lot of what you're all talking about, which is sort of being co-equals to one another, in that you divide up tasks. You both, nobody is sort of second chair to the other one. But there are models also where some co-mediations, there's sort of a lead mediator. Sometimes you see this in commercial mediations, I think. Ken, you would know that. But where one of the mediators will sort of be the lead, and then there's sort of the second chair, who might take notes or might help out or do other things. I don't know, what's your experience with the second chair type?
I guess I've usually been the, quote, first chair, but if the, quote, second chair moved in and something was happening, I just dropped in behind and went with the play. So kind of the terminology first chair and second chair, and whether experienced or not, it's a real running gunfight, and it's whoever's got the best position of doing something. They're, for whatever reason, you kind of go with the flow. Well, yeah, I kind of view it that way. Yeah.
I think sometimes, again, I'm really speaking off the top of my head here, but for example, some of the, like Jams, who does the big commercial mediations, I get the feeling, though, if they sometimes have co-mediators, they may actually pay them differently. I don't know if that's true, like if there's a lead and a second. It doesn't really matter to us, but I think I've heard that.
Usually when I've been in it, I have not been in one where there was double pay. I got it in two, the ones I've had have been two types. One was here, and it was with Mike Nathanson, which was a lot of fun. And I can give an anecdote there that I think is very instructive.
I know that.
The others were a way to get people in my law firm who'd gone through the training, but the catch-22, you can't get in cases. They could get cases. So they'd done the training, and they were experienced lawyer litigator kind of things, which I have an anecdote with that too, which wasn't good. And still, every co-mediation has been better if it wasn't co-mediation. The one with Mike Nathanson, it was commercial, multiple lawsuits, and an arbitration, all pending on the edge of summary judgment, actually Law Division, Chancery Division, and AAA. 3 lawyers for the 3 sides. And on one of the sides, the lawyers were good, and I partly was doing this, Mike wanted more experience with what I used to call pre-mediation work, and how to get a West Coast term I like better, which is early recon. And I did the early recon and then fed to him what I'd learned about it ahead of time. And one of the things I had is on one of the players, I had 2 ethnicities. I had Italian and I had Indian, Southeast Asian, whatever. And on the Italian one, I was warned that there was a mother this is the Italian side, a mother, there was 2 sons, one of them was a firefighter who was volatile and big. And we got to a point in the mediation where Mike Nathanson was going to do the famous venom vent, and I'm always chicken about venting because it's really out of control. So I said, okay, I got to watch this. I know Mike's good at it. So Mike did it, and literally the fireman's chair went flying back. He towered over Mike. Mike didn't know what his reactions were. I told him afterwards because Mike did that kind of, you know, Lincoln-esque nodding, you know, sympathetic look, and then as the fireman toned down and was feeling a little embarrassed because he wasn't the one who was the problem. And he was a putty cat afterwards, and it was great. I could never do it.
So again, it's, and we're going to talk more about that, but having the different types of skills and strengths of balancing.
Yeah, and that was when I was going with him entirely on that. I was decided, okay, let's. And it was interesting. One or the other of us would kind of move in the particular situation where there seemed to be effectiveness, but in one of the big things, any one of the co-mediations is you get a break to watch what's going on, think, and watch a different
Which is different because if you're
Every
in the
time.
moment, you really can't sort of observe
Now,
what's going on.
one I did with one in my office, he was arguing with someone in private caucus, and I kicked him, and I didn't do it, so I said, excuse me, can we go out with him? I said, what the hell are you doing? He said, well, he's wrong. I said, are you going to persuade him? He said, no. I said, so where the hell does that get us? We're mediators, remember? You did the training. He said, oh, yeah. I mean, kind of
So
defaulted wrong.
So it's a
But he
learning,
was still,
thing too.
he proved out to be useful in the mediation. It helped with the mediation. Not that time, but it wasn't useful.
So when there is a lead and a second chair, sometimes what it is that the lead person might be the more experienced person, and the sort of second chair might be the new trainee, which is what happened in your situation. Could be that the lead mediator is the new trainee, and the one who's sort of taking the back seat, in a sense, is the experienced one who can then pop in when necessary. And sometimes when there's a lead mediator, or even sort of more equal mediators, one may actually be more the subject matter expertise person more than the mediator, to be there to provide some of that information. That can happen too. It's also, and I think we already mentioned this, there can be different roles, whether you're the note taker and sort of the observer, and somebody else is more the speaker, the talker, or you vary those roles. There's one benefit from that. I remember the story that when Jimmy Carter was, can't remember if it was like the Israeli-Egyptian peace talks. He was doing some big negotiation. Is it Rosalind or Rosalind? Rosalind, I think. Rosalind. Carter is sort of sitting to the side behind him apparently, and she's not actually doing the mediation like he is, but she is watching everything. And so at the end of the day, she would say, this one's turning off. This one's facial expressions were saying this. This one, so she was, giving him sort of all the information of what was going on in terms of the personalities. So again, another powerful thing, because like you said, if you're in the midst of the mediation, sometimes you can't pull back in a sense to sort of see the big picture.
Under roles, I also put in the PowerPoint about the good cop, bad cop.
Oh, let me give a little, this is interesting. In my office, when we can, we don't do it usually, but we do co-mediation in my office. And it's funny because I've co-mediated with a number of different mediators, and you can also take on different personalities. It's funny, when I would mediate with this mediator, we used to have Andrew. Andrew is this very calm, very serene. Actually, he had his divinity degree before he came on as a mediator. And so when we would co-mediate, we would sort of take on good cop, bad cop in the sense that I would do sort of the reality testing and could sort of be tough in reality testing, and he was sort of the soother and the sort of acknowledging emotions person. And then, and Yvonne knows this person, when I would mediate with this other person, Jan is sort of the tough cop and sort of the more heavy reality tester, and I'd be sort of the soother. So it can be even depending on who you're co-mediating with, you may take on different personalities. It may not be the same depending on who you're actually mediating with, which is sort of interesting. Okay, so the benefits. We sort of talked about it. You get 2 sets of eyes, 2 sets of ears, and basically, not just for you, the benefit to you, but it's a benefit to the parties that they can feel even more heard, more understood. Or if they feel one person isn't connecting with them, they may feel the other mediator is connecting with them. It's a great way to be able to match backgrounds. So for example, in divorce mediation, if you have a mother and a father, male, female, and your mediator is male or your mediator is female, it can set up the situation, even if, the mediator is totally neutral, that one party, let's say if I'm mediating, is dad going to feel like, well, now there's 2 women in the room. So, of course, they're going to agree. Even when you tell them it doesn't matter, you're not the decision maker. But that, setting up that feeling. Or it could be if there's a male mediator, is the mom going to feel like, there's 2 men in the room. Now, it's interesting because we did have situations at my job once where there was had been some domestic violence, but it was a case that could be mediated. And in that case, the mediator, who was male, said to the mom, are you going to be okay with 2 men in the room? And she said, I'm happy there are 2 men in the room because he's going to be able to listen to you and not act out because there's a male in the room. So again, you don't know how that dynamic is going to work. So it can be age. I remember Michael Nathanson saying once that, I think it was him, who said, when he deals with very young people, he doesn't know how he's perceived if he's doing like a juvenile case or something. So, I don't know, we've never done a study, but, let's say if you're doing the juvenile court cases, would the juveniles relate more to maybe a younger mediator? Would they react better to somebody who was a little older? I don't know what the answer would be to that. I mean, I can guess, but same with race, ethnicity, experience, gender, education, language, personalities. I mean, all those things, if you think it would be a benefit, could be things that could be determined depending on the case that you have, to create more comfort to the parties. And it's also a way that it's harder to pull two mediators to your side versus trying to pull one person to your side. There can be mediators can hear things differently, which can affect the ability to connect with a party. And also may help in strategizing an approach to the mediation. So again, you guys have sort of already put those things out there, but if you have 2 heads, I know everybody who mediates. At the end of the mediation, how many of you are like, I wish somebody else had seen this so that I could debrief with somebody who actually was in the room at the same time? I don't know. I have that feeling all the time. I wish
it's
somebody else
harder to
could see.
describe it.
I know,
why
I know.
I made this choice in this moment. It made sense, I promise. I think it was the right thing, but I need somebody to see.
That's why there's peer review.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Right.
And which is, it's a great thing because somebody else sees the same thing that you do. And the thing is, you may not hear it the same way. So, if you hear it the same way, but if you don't hear it the same way, again, that can provide a lot more information in strategizing. Like I said with the Rosalind Carter, mediators can watch parties' reactions and watch the body language. If you're the one listening, the other person's talking. And, if, let's say, a party, again, doesn't connect with you, they don't feel, that rapport we talk about hasn't been established, again, it sort of at least doubles the opportunity that they may feel rapport with the other mediator. For some people, and again, this is something, we'll talk about later, but it could speed up the process if you do separate caucuses. I tend to be one who likes, again, both mediators to sort of hear the same thing. Yeah. But it's also can be very helpful, to also to do the one-on-one, and one mediator meets with one party. And
could you talk more about that? Because as I was driving down here, I was thinking, gee, how would it work if you had separate caucuses?
I've done it before with parents and their children, and it seemed to work particularly. I don't know if it was the kind of case, but it seemed to work. We would work in teams often in those kinds of cases. I would say that when we came back together, I don't know how else to describe it other than to say that it would kind of intuitively work. If there was something, let's say, that came out in the caucus that I was working with a kid and co-mediator was working with a parent, there's something that came out in caucus that that person needed to ask questions or they were hesitant to say, but the mediator, they talked about those things. I guess it would have been that mediator's instinct to kind of nudge or find her or his way in there to sort of bring that about or ask that really important question. And that the trust that you built in joint session would sort of offer that kind of space that you have for each other. And that you can kind of share that knowledge, I don't know, in more of an intuitive way than rather than in a...
But what if a party in caucus says, now I don't want you to talk about this?
Right.
To the other mediator?
Well, that's the next question.
I think you'd have to have a rule that you have to be able to talk to the other mediator. I mean, you can keep it certainly confidential from the other party, but I don't think it
Okay,
I think it would be
so
very
you-
hard to do a mediation
As
if you didn't.
mediators, would you want to get together before going back into the joint?
I would think so. To sort of share with each other, you know, because again, it's strategizing,
Yeah.
you know, of how do you want to approach it.
Sometimes we did and sometimes we didn't because we didn't have time. And my experience was that it seemed to work fine. If we didn't end up having the time, it seemed to be okay.
Okay.
So you didn't have enough time, so you get in more caucuses, you split?
Right, so we would, exactly. So in order to save
Other
the
than
time.
that, because you're out of time and you've got to get some caucuses in, did you find any other advantage by splitting?
I can just think of one. Again, my preference would be that you wouldn't split people up, but I could see that if you have somebody that's a little too intimidated to talk to two people,
Oh.
that it feels too much like there's two people, you know, interrogate, not that it would be an interrogation, but maybe they would feel that if they're just talking to one person, or it could also be if you felt that somebody connected with you better than with the other mediator, then you could go either way. You might want to go with the one you connected with in order for them to feel comfortable, or you may want to meet with the other one in order to establish a connection if you felt that would be necessary. So again, I think it would be sort of strategic.
Whether it's private or joint, what is your tendency on body movement of the two mediators? I mean, what I tended to do naturally was whoever was at that point doing something physically was more into it, and the other one would drop back, even if it was just dropping back in their chair.
Mm-hmm.
So it was focused on whoever
In terms of who
was
you would
doing
select
it.
for caucus?
And if you started coming back in, the other mediator, then a reverse, so.
Oh, you're talking in the joint session?
Yeah, joint
In general.
or in private caucus, so you tended between the mediators to have a little physical drop back on the one who isn't leading at that point, so it didn't get.
It's sort of a signifier to everybody in the room.
Yeah.
That seems to happen kind of organically.
Naturally, yeah.
I don't recall ever setting that up in advance, and I
would
remember
think
that
they
has
always
happened.
happen.
That's definitely something I
Yeah.
have
One
experienced.
doing tends to lean forward, and the other one
Yeah,
tends to drop back.
and I don't think it would be harmful to set that up. Say you should sit back if you intend to sit out for a few minutes.
It also is signaling your fellow mediator, hey, I'm coming in here on something, so
Exactly.
they actually, because they have so much attention on the parties, they're not necessarily on the other mediator, so it's a way of drawing attention to your
Those
co-mediator.
kinds of signals would be something that would be a good idea to set up in advance. Those and other things, like C for caucus, or
Another thing that I think it can be very valuable is that, I mean, this is a benefit to the parties and to the mediators, is I remember I did a co-mediation with Michael Nathanson, and we started at 9 a.m. and we went till 5 p.m. and the parties went to the bathroom, we didn't go to the bathroom, and I think CCR brought lunch in. I mean, this was a long time ago. But so what it does is, there's two of you, if somebody's energy is starting to lag,
Right.
you know, the other ones can sort of get in until you're sort of, because, you know, I mean, if you're mediating for many hours, your mind can start to, you know, wander and somebody else can sort of be focused in. So I think in terms of energy, it can be a very important thing. Again, just in terms of reality testing, the diversity between mediators, their experience and things is going to, I think, have a richer sort of reality testing. And also, this is what we talk about in divorce mediation. I don't know if the parties see it this way, but what we try to do is that co-mediators can also model cooperative decision-making and can sort of show that two people can have a constructive conversation, or that, you know, they can, I mean, again, you really don't ever want to disagree with your co-mediator. I mean, that's sort of one of the rules. You don't want to get into conflict with the co-mediator. But if there's something slight that then they can see you actually say, okay, you do it this time, I'm going to do it next time, or something, you know, it can be sort of modeling that behavior. That's enough for that.
By the way, I
Quality
think if
service
you really
parties.
find something's going.
Say again?
I think if you find something you feel is going squarely with your co-mediator, I don't think there's a problem saying, can we just step out for a
Oh,
minute?
no,
and talk about it?"
definitely you take breaks when it's necessary to do it.
So we've already identified a lot of benefits to mediators. What are some of the things that you might be able to think of that are benefits to yourself as a mediator that we might not have talked about so far?
Well, one thing that came, it's certainly not part of the program necessarily, but Julie and I became good friends.
Oh, good. Increased relationships, absolutely. That's important to me in my roles, that the relationships are strong. Absolutely.
Yeah, working collaboratively with someone, having, you know, peer energy, I think is,
That's
I
fun.
think that's good. It's
Peer
fun.
energy,
It's good.
absolutely. It gives you sort of is nurturing in a certain way.
And it does give you that break. I mean, I always walk in with things I want to sort of think about, or I just little boast to myself, I never look at the notes. You know, I can think about it ahead, I never have a second. And it's just nice to have a little balance and give and take.
The ethnicity split is very definite. In this mediation I did with Julie, actually, there were Hispanic, there were African American, there were Irish, white, Caucasian, plus a few other races in there, and we were picked actually with 3. We had a Hispanic woman, so both sex, ethnicity was different. She had to drop out, but we would pick up different things. And I was just in on a peer review with an African American mediator, where she was picking up all sorts of things with an African American couple in the mediation that I was missing. I mean, nuances.
You know, you just reminded me, I was doing a mediation for CCR with a group of people who were living together in sort of an intentional community. And after the first meeting, so much of it was about race in the household that I knew, you know, I need somebody. And does anybody know Kim White? She moved to Milwaukee. But so I brought Kim White, who's an African American, to join me. We both had a hard time, but because it was a really difficult case. But it was so much, number one, it was so much better to have another person to strategize with. And also, again, for that balance of black and white, especially when the issue's about race.
So some of the benefits that we see for mediators are that it lightens your load. It sort of increases your own comfort level. 2 heads are better than 1. It sort of gives you a sense, look, somebody's got my back. I don't have to think of everything. This whole thing isn't on my shoulders. It's a great, contributes to this idea of a community of learning, which is an idea that I've tried to carry forth here at CCR in a few ways. This is how I think co-mediation does it. We can break in a new mediator. So a newer mediator has an opportunity not only to watch somebody, but to do it with someone. So the action of it, I think, is an unparalleled learning tool when you're actually being an active co-mediator with somebody who's more experienced. Experienced mediators can learn techniques from both experienced and new people. So I ask, and I think we should all ask of ourselves, even if we have a lot of experience, to approach every situation with the mind of a beginner. And to think of new things like, wow, that's so amazing, I never thought of that, and to add things to our practice. I think that makes our community strong, and it makes us sort of pliable and engaged. I think it'll make our community stronger. Debriefs are better and more thorough. When somebody else can help describe how that was, and your shared descriptions sort of help clarify things for you. When you can hear somebody describe it a little bit differently, things come clearer. And when you're having that shared experience, like Jane is debriefing Samantha and I, when we're explaining this to her, she can ask us better questions because she's got a richer understanding of what actually happened.
And I just was thinking when you said that, and like, at least somebody will remember stuff. Just memory.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yep. It really helps to have another person for large multi-party disputes. There's too much to keep track of in those kinds of things. Too many details. We all miss things in mediation, and the likelihood that we're missing things goes up with these large multi-party disputes. Check potential biases for both mediators. So when I saw you, Yvonne, do blank, I noticed X happen. I was wondering if there might have been a bias going on there for you. It might be how we would feedback about that. So benefits to CCR, I was already talking about some of them with the community of learning. This is a great way to train and assess new mediators while making them feel comfortable. I think the learning, the value as far as learning here, I haven't experienced another tool that I think is more valuable than co-mediation. You can mediate more complex cases with multiple parties. We increase our ability to handle this kind of case. Develop our community of learning. Oh, I've noticed an interesting thing in communities that do this. I think that the skill set of the entire population rises because we're cross-pollinating skills. The understanding of our model, the understanding of our principles, really, it all rises at the same time. What's the, if anybody can think of an analogy for that, for them all kind of coming up with the same, think about it.
I like that cross-pollinating.
It's kind of cross-pollinating, but and all sort of inflating. If that makes sense. Increased connectivity, like we were talking about among volunteers.
Okay. So the challenge, what do you think the challenges would be of doing co-mediation?
One thing for the parties, I think it's hard for two mediators who are strong and have an idea of how they're going to not be formidable to the parties, you know, to not come across as too much together, too strong, too much of a vision, you know, unless just like listening. I just think it's a tricky thing that the mediators would have to be aware of.
So it's almost like power.
Power.
In a sense, power.
Yeah, it's it could be a little bit overwhelming, I would think.
Yeah, I'm sorry, do you mean between the mediators and the participants, or
Participants to the mediator. The two mediators
Yeah.
being too much of a unit, coming across maybe as a unit of strength and of knowledge of something, of leadership, you know.
Yeah.
I think for the two mediators to sort of come up with a rhythm of how they're going to work together.
Man, I can't picture if I was in a co-mediation and I just had the perfect thing to say at a particular moment, and the other mediator felt the same way. That would be a tough thing to deal with.
And said the same thing or something different?
No, something different. They had it one direction they wanted to take it, and it was just perfect, and they had to.
So it wasn't like, that's my question.
You're in the same boat, but you want to take it a different way.
I guess it's kind of similar, but like if you're one of the mediators and you're going a certain direction and you're like, you have a couple more questions you want to ask that way, and then somebody changes it, and you're just like, shoot, I'm not done with that, and then they change the subject, you know what to do then.
So working out how do you say something? What do you say?
What's the problem
You know?
right there, just saying, can you hang on one second, I just wanted to do a couple more
No, I
questions.
think the other thing you suggested, you kick them under the table.
Well-
Wasn't that the only thing you said?
Well, when you really had to get out of the room, when they were really, I mean, it was totally counterproductive. No, I mean, or get out of the room, but I mean, you can say it, I mean, I don't think it has to be such a formalized dance in that situation, or someone is on track with something, the other one's breaking, it's like, could you give me just a second on this, and the other one's any kind of mediator. You got
Because
enough time,
again,
let 'em get a
the
break.
fear would be you don't want them to perceive that, again, you're in conflict.
Well, that's-
So it has to be very subtle.
That was one of the questions I had, because you mentioned that, like in divorce mediation, you can model, you know, the relationship, the communication. How much do you actually speak to each other? And I guess maybe it varies, but how much do the mediators actually speak to each other versus just speaking to?
Probably not that much.
Right.
As
But
an
I think the
example-
potential is there. I mean, I think you'd have to really, again, strategize of how you might want to use that. I mean,
Well, for just the same, I mean, Cookie and I are sort of facilitating a discussion now, and if we want to just sort of draw it in, and I don't think we've communicated,
Right.
we haven't made eye contact really. We've communicated here and there. I just tried to interrupt her, I backed off, right? So if you kind of observe some of the things that we're doing, she is, yeah, okay, cool. Some of those
I have a
sort of
taser
subtle-
under.
Yeah.
I suspect your biggest problem would be you've got someone who's basically an evaluative mediator, not a hard-nosed real, reality testing, and a facilitative one. The evaluative one might start trying to really run into the facilitative one because, facilitative one find it difficult. I guess I don't know, maybe I just haven't run into that with a
I would see
co-mediator.
that one as a strategy, since I haven't done it with an evaluative, but my feeling would be, if I were going to do that, I would think the discussion would be, you the facilitative one, go as far as you can go.
Right.
And then let's talk about when it's time to get in the heavy
Right,
hitter.
because it is more back end, it should be at least more back
Right.
end, if they're gonna do it.
And Joe, you had a?
But I was kind of to what Samantha and Mark were saying about, that there's those moments, and it might not be in the course of like a series of questions, but like something comes up maybe by one of the parties that you hear, and you want, it seems like it's either like a now or never sort of opportunity, and the other person takes it somewhere. Those can be kind of, it's delicate too, because you don't want to derail them. There's, I think it's we all agree that there isn't one perfect question for any given instance. You know, it can go any number of ways, so you don't want to get in their way either. And if they beat you to the punch, they beat you to the punch, so sort of. So like, I mean, that's something to manage. And I'm listening to all this and I'm thinking about like my experience doing the one this fall, and I'm happy we made it through fairly well. But we did so little strategizing beforehand. We spent a lot of time talking about the case itself and like what was going on, but we didn't.
But did you say you know each other though?
Yeah.
See, that probably also helps that you have some idea of each other
Oh, yeah.
before you did it. That might have instinctually.
So afterwards,
Helped in
did
a
you
way.
think that was a real disadvantage that you hadn't at the front?
No, I'm. It's kind of like that. Now I'm thinking, you know, I'm happy it all went well, but I think now, like looking at it, you know, I would probably give a little more structure on the front end. You know, in case we run into this, kind of be ready. I'm always inclined not to do a lot of structure. I like to kind of freewheel it as much as possible. I mean, we had to do a lot just to kind of figure out what was going on prior, and I think we felt comfortable that because we had talked so much about kind of the substance of what was going on, that the rest of it would kind of find its way. But I think in other instances that might not have worked as well.
And I think you could, like for example, if I guess it's also very much listening to your co-mediator as well as the parties, and if you can hear from your experience, you know, when I see they're going down a line, I'm gonna let them go as far as I think that they need to go, and then be able, you know, for each person to be able to say, you know, is there either turning to the other person, I guess a signal of I'm sort of done, and being then able to sort of turn to the person, or, you know, anything, you know, you wanted to add or ask. So there could be some kind of signal as to, you know, I've sort of finished my line of questioning.
See, I think to me, I was listening, it's almost like that active listening thing has to apply between the mediators as much as the other, and it seems like something to talk about, that you have to make a conscious effort to try and stay with where that person is, and then maybe to get back to what you want to say later and not interrupt. It's sort of the same thing as you want the parties to do. You have to do between each other.
A wise person once told me, a wise mediator, really experienced and wise, I thought he was a wise person, and he was an experienced mediator, said that if the other person that you were working with is doing something you did not think was the right direction, to just sit back and to just let them, essentially just not excuse yourself from the mediation entirely, but not to try to redirect things and not to try to because that struggle would end up really probably damaging the quality of the process as a whole. It's probably better off, unless they're doing direct harm to the parties, unless the parties are harmed as a result, that it's really probably best to just
Come back in with your own.
Come back in and support their thing when you can. But if that's where it's headed, if that's where the energy is, then you should just, you'll have to check your ego and let that go.
Let them crash and burn.
Okay, Steve was just doing an experiment. Now it's my turn, you know. Bring humor in. I just wanted to see if it would crash and burn.
That's right.
It's just going to take up a little time, no deal. If you think it's really going to dig one of the holes, then I think it's a good idea to say, excuse me, can we just talk outside, and then say what your problem is. They might say what they're trying to do, you know, work it out. Then go back in. I mean, usually, now I'll admit, most of the things I do are not relational per se, you know, on the continuum. Tend to be a dispute, it's going to tend to be money at the end. So relational is different, where the flow becomes more important. But there's usually time you can take, you know, it's 15 seconds, 20 seconds, something.
I think that would be a great idea, to take a caucus and say, I have a different idea about how where this really ought to be going. I think that's a nice idea. I think the question is, if you don't have the opportunity to do that, or if the person just has a really different idea of what mediation is and how things should happen. The essence behind it is to just check your ego and let it happen. Let the person.
I mean, basically, some people aren't going to like it. You know, it isn't going to be something that they you know, they just want to do their thing. Some people like it. I like it a lot. Some people don't like it a lot. So that's partly you do have to sort of figure out what's your own personality and ego, and you know, can you do that? But in terms of, you know, some of the things is that because you have to work together, you have to organize yourself. So again, how are you going to divide up the work? who's gonna do the opening statement, you know, what are you gonna do with summarizing, caucuses, the pre-mediation work if you're gonna do that. And again, figuring out how are you gonna confer, you know, during the mediation or make decisions, you know, when to caucus or who to meet with in what order. So it may be that you do need to take breaks. Or again, you might be able to say, you know, well, Mac, I think, you know, this might be a time, you know, that we're gonna meet with Yvonne, what do you think? Or do you have a different thought? You know, just being able to maybe have that conversation and then decide what you're gonna do. And then that question that came up before is, you know, will you ever meet separately with parties? You know, and how you know, do you want to maintain a unified focus? I mean, I don't know, to be quite honest, I don't have any experience in, but there may be co-mediators who do sort of somehow play off of each other, and maybe they do disagree as a strategy. I don't know, I mean, that part I'm not sure.
That was in the Wedding Crashers.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if you
I
remember
love that
that
opening scene.
So
You can give us some of the mileage. Okay. Has everybody seen that opening? If you haven't, go onto YouTube and they have that very beginning. It's hysterical. I show it in class as, this is not how you mediate. But again, you know, to talk about style differences, because again, you do need to talk to one another before you do this. The whole idea again is, can you do this in terms of your ego? Will it be too difficult for you to do it? And then, you know, what if you have a disagreement about a strategy to pursue? You know, let's say you take your break and you talk about it, or a disagreement of how you're reading the parties, what the parties need. You know, how are you going to work all those things out? To be quite honest, it hasn't. I think Michael and I, because we've co-mediated a number of times, we had one issue where I thought a party was starting to get. I think the party was maybe a little mentally ill. I think there was a problem. Because she was the type that when you did reality testing, as you continued in your reality testing, I could see her start to direct her hostility, which was towards the other party, towards the mediators, in terms of, but in a way that's not quite a healthy way, if you get my drift. So, you know, you may read parties differently as to, you know what, we need to sort of give this up, or no, we can continue. But again, people might bring different, you know, for example, in the divorce mediation, and you could certainly do this in any mediation, it was originally designed that all divorce mediation, this is back in the 70s, would be co-mediation, male and female. But it would also be someone with an attorney background and somebody with a mental health background. So in terms of divorce, there would be some, not because they could give advice, but somebody would understand the divorce dynamics of what was going on personality-wise with the people, and the other person would understand, sort of for BATNA purposes, you know, what was likely to happen in court or how to do the reality testing. So again, you might read things differently, but hopefully that makes it richer rather than a conflict. There could be issues of scheduling, you know, and also, again, how you want to set up the environment. Again, do you sit across from each other? Do you sit next to each other? And I think one of the, in terms of challenges, you know, the question would be, would co-mediators do less cases for CCR? Would they do more, maybe, if they like doing this process? I mean, because CCR doesn't want to do this, then, you know, it's like, well, I've already done my mediation, but yeah, that used up 2 mediators and we have other cases.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's historically been one of the arguments against co-mediation. We're at a place now where we have a pretty strong pool of volunteers, which is great. So this is the first time logistically, I think in a long time, that it is possible that we can say, yes, we can sort of dedicate the resources to have 2 volunteers on 1 case at this point. And the way I would hope to see it happen is that it's in some way voluntary, so that folks who enjoy co-mediation could have that opportunity, and folks who really prefer to have single mediations have their opportunity to work too, and there's cases for them, so there might be some kind of proportions.
I also don't think it would change any of how CCR does their training. I mean, I think everybody has to be able to solo mediate in order to be here, but then having the opportunity of the co-mediation to be the possibility. Yeah. So
It seems kind of like following on what you said, Mac, you know, the supply and demand dynamics. You know, there's a lot of people that we've talked to that have wanted to get in and to becoming, you know, volunteer mediators, and essentially the center's, you know, basic voice is, sorry, we have, you know, very few slots, a lot of applicants, and we don't really have opportunities for you.
Right.
And
This
it-
might open up more
It
opportunities
seems
for
that
people
this
to.
would be one way, yeah, to
Well,
increase
that's
this.
true, I didn't think of it that way, but you're right.
So, and I would definitely like to see that, because there's a lot of people that I think would definitely like to get on here, and there just aren't enough opportunities right now.
Mhm.
I never thought that.
All right, so when is it most beneficial to do co-mediations? Like we were talking about, complex cases are technical in nature. If you're a new learning mediator, if you want to get your legs under you a little bit. Or when you're just curious and want to sort of learn about some of your habits, you want somebody to observe you, you're really ready to listen, and you're ready to kind of challenge some of your habits, rethink some of the things that you do. When might it not be useful? It can be really hard to add a mediator after a case has already started. Although I've done it before.
I have to, actually.
Yeah, I've done it before. Actually, there was a case I had one time where there was a man who was just kind of, he was really racist and saying some awful things to a Puerto Rican woman, and I was just having trouble. I was losing my neutrality, and I didn't know how to handle the situation. And so I brought in a co-mediator, and she really helped manage the whole thing beautifully and got things right back on track, which was really
And I
helpful.
did it with Kim joining me for the large group, because this went on for probably 5 meetings or 6 meetings, because this was over a number of weeks. But again, since we had a number of sessions, she came in the second session, so it worked out fine.
Right. And if you do that, I'd say you probably would want to be thoughtful about getting buy-in from the parties that you're working with, getting sort of the sense that this person is your equal, so some kind of opening statement that establishes them as neutral and confidential. Important.
So who should decide? This is sort of up in the air. We just sort of put questions down of whether the center would recommend co-mediation for particular cases, and that has happened when it's been large facilitations and things like that. Again, the idea that some would want to work and do co-mediation, some solo. But it is, again, a valuable learning opportunity. I mean, I think, even though I've been around for a long time, I don't know if this is just age, but I'll co-mediate with somebody and go, I used to do that technique. I haven't done that technique in years. I mean, it's sort of like you forget some of the things you used to do, and again, it's that idea that it's like refreshing in some ways to be able to, like, oh my God, I forgot that. Again, implementing it could be, again, the training for new and experienced mediators. My personal bias, I don't know if I should put biases out there, but I think our new trainees should do a co-mediation with somebody before they do their first mediation. I mean, if they want to. If they don't want to, and they're fine with that. But I think a lot would feel so much more comfortable. And again, it could be where the experienced person is like the second chair, or they could do it. They would talk about how they would want to do it. Well, we've sort of talked about that. Again, about not challenging your co-mediator. And, again, the clients in the intake might be informed that they're going to be 2 mediators.
So, I'm sorry, Cookie, those last few points you talked about didn't make it into the PowerPoint, so just to review them.
Oh, okay.
When implementing, we're suggesting that it's important to give folks training, so a training like you're experiencing right now. Mediators should be given reminders about their cases, about tips for co-mediating. And thirdly, the clients should be made aware of during intake that you'll be working with 2 mediators instead of 1, if possible.
Are you going to do metric evaluations if you do this? And try to see,
What do you mean?
well, trying to see various outcomes and if there's differences in how co-mediators do it. For instance, the degree amount of time they spend consulting ahead of time versus
I don't
not.
think we
So
thought
that
about
you
it, but
get
it's
some
certainly-
idea as you're doing this, what is the result compared to when it's solo, and what kind of different co-mediations do you wind up getting, and do you get different kinds of results, however you define results, depending on how they do it. I mean, you're going to have a test bed for doing it. It seems a mistake not to try to quantify it in some way, including one of the elements you have is that, at least the materials is talking about, it would take longer with co-mediation, which I'm not sure that's true. But I don't know. I mean, will co-mediations take more time or less chronologically to get to termination? I mean,
In my experience, it hasn't taken long.
I wouldn't think so, but there was some
again, it's a good
material in here that was saying, it might take longer. Well, I mean, I was kind of surprised when I saw it. Some of the material was here.
Is that just by virtue of some of the some of the, I guess, cases that lend themselves to co-mediation.
I think that would be part of
Okay,
it.
then it's the kind of
Yeah.
case. I mean, if you got
But just a
zoning
regular
people-
case, I don't know if it would be longer than a solo, but
It
I
kind
mean, in
of
terms
makes
of the
intuitive
big
sense
part.
to me. Generally speaking, the more people you have talking in a group or in a room,
Mhm.
the more time is spent, right? I mean, I don't know if those two things kind of go, but
Yeah, but
maybe not.
the co-mediators don't, the mediators don't do the talking like the parties do. You're gonna be tending to be serial and you're moving along, so I'm not so sure it actually is any longer.
I mean, in the divorce mediation I've done,
Well, that
I haven't seen it be longer.
Yeah, I mean, I would be surprised, but that's one of the things you could get some metrics on, and maybe you, in fact, there might be a lot of surprises you get
Yeah.
when you're checking it out. You'd have to have a number of cases, because you've got the individuality of the kind of cases and the mediators doing it. And feedback from the co-mediators, you know, some kind of a organized checklist by them of what their feedback was. Well, how did this work? How do you think it worked compared to if you were doing it solo? Did you like it, not like it, scale of 1 to 5? I mean, just try to get some kind of an idea, if you do test it out, what happens, because I don't think anybody knows much about this.
Well, from the mediators and the parties.
Yeah,
You know,
I
you put it on the survey at the end.
That's right.
What would you think if this
Client
had been?
satisfaction rates.
What if you got rid of Cookie?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's one of the questions. Would it have been better if one of the co-mediators wasn't there? I mean, that.
Which one?
Which one?
Who did you like?
Whichever. I mean, but-
Who would you like to tip?
If you could pay just one of them.
No, but I have a hunch they'd say, no, they all added something. I'll bet you that's going to be the overwhelming result. But you know what? That's just a guess. I mean, you actually could find out.
In a way, it's less personal, because they're not, if there's just one, it's a more personal situation, it maybe
I don't know.
confuses
You
it.
know,
Yeah, I don't know.
if they'd say, I'd rather would have been just one. You know, like they liked one and the other, and they.
Well, it'd be,
I don't know.
it'd be a little bit tricky too, but I guess you could ask the parties ahead of time, would you prefer 1 or 2 mediators? But, you know.
You know, you could, but
Well,
I'm not sure they know.
yeah,
If they
they-
haven't, if
they-
they're experienced in mediation, like they've done a million,
Yeah.
but I would think most of ours would have not a clue.
Even
Also-
asking if they would like, if they wish there had been 1 versus 2, they may not have a real way to evaluate
Yeah,
whatever.
also, if they're represented, it would be interesting to see what the reactions as a group of lawyers would be to it. You know, do they say, wow, that really worked well, or, you know, that was a real waste of time having 2 people, or whatever.
I mean, lawyers tend, I don't know if this, I can make this generalization really fairly, but tend to either like a mediator or not like, right? So sometimes attorneys in mediation like a particular style of mediation or are turned off by a particular style.
Well,
So
that's
actually,
what's
attorneys may be
interesting.
happier because they got at least a.
At least
a
one
choice.
person that they're like, well, thank God this person's not an idiot. You know?
Well, and so, you know, I mean, it would be interesting to find out, because I'm not sure if anybody has ever gathered that. So if you wind
I don't
up doing any kind of numbers, you have a test bed for that.
So do. All right, so how to prepare, advice for putting this all together. We've talked about this before. Sorry, was this a session of yours? Okay. Co-mediators should spend a few minutes talking before the session to prepare. Talk about roles, any signals that you want to make. Sometimes like a big M with a circle means mediator caucus, or X means shut up, I have something to say. Or you can come up with really anything. Or the when I lean in like this, that means that it's time for me to talk. It should be intuitive. What we're going to do
If you
about
come up
the
with new
opening-
ones, we'd like to know what those are.
Yeah, we would.
Interesting ones.
What we're going to do about the opening statement. Sometimes, like if I'm mediating between Kent and Jane, Cookie's going to summarize Jane, I'm going to summarize Kent, or something like that. So we'll split that up sometimes too. And then sometimes there's things to talk about with caucus as well. Co-mediators should be encouraged to caucus with each other. Cookie, I want to take some time to just meet with you. Do you mind if we step out into the hall and we'll separate the parties and we'll come back in a couple minutes? Might be how you say that.
Yeah, and that's important.
Right. Generally trust your mediator. She is on a different track, waited out. You might be surprised at the outcome. These things end up with all kinds of ways, right? We don't know the picture that we're forming until it's formed. And all of a sudden, then we have a dragon that's got some curly Q parts and some jaggedy parts. And it's a dragon. And that's an awesome dragon, right? And your parts are the curly Qs and mine are the pointy ones, or whatever. To have a sort of a through line of trust is sort of what this is built on. How should you debrief between after a mediation session? So this is Cookie and I are debriefing after our session. This is our advice. Use techniques for honesty, openness, and shared learning. So that's our approach. We want to make sure that we're honest, we're totally open to the other person, and that we're learning together, whether I'm experienced or new. Experienced folks, you'll often learn something new. Point it out. Let's say I've been mediating for 30 years and Cookie's been mediating for 2. And I saw her do something that I forgot about. Cookie, I saw you do this, and I haven't even thought of that in so long. And that just is such a helpful reminder to me. That can go a long way to sort of boost them, and it's just a helpful kind of reminder to yourself that you can continually learn from new people. Offer positives. Offer positives with any feedback. Generally speaking, we want to be specific with behavior. So when I saw you do blank, I noticed blank happen as a result. Is that your perception of the situation? Is how that usually should go forward. Sometimes it's hard to find a balance between that and not sounding clinical. Usually if you're thoughtful enough and with enough experience, you can sort of find the right balance. But this is a good way to kind of get some of those value judgments out of the way when you're sort of talking about specific behaviors. Ask about your own areas of weakness. You know, I've really been thinking about blank. I have a tendency to do X. And I've really kind of been wondering about that. Did you notice any, when I did that tonight, did you notice any impact on the parties? What did you think? Was that positive or negative? Or I recently got feedback that, you know, my opening statement's a little forceful. I come across a little judicious. Did you notice anything about that? It was a good way to ask that kind of question. Oops, that's the end.
And actually, I mean, from, you know, coming out of the discussion, probably what could be done is that we could make up a form that would sort of have these, like a debriefing form, basically, that people could sort of go from.
Why is CCR just now considering getting into co-mediation? Is it because of, you know, sort of a surplus or enough mediators? Or?
Some of us have been yelling about it for a while.
Oh, well, what kind of resistance have you been running into when you're
I think the only, I mean,
champion?
not yelling about it, but I mean, I've mentioned it for a long time because I like doing it. But I think part of the situation, which I can totally understand, is that, let's say you have a case manager, has a case, is trying to get a mediator for it, now they have to juggle 2 people's schedules.
Yeah.
My thought was that there could be like a pool of people who like to co-mediate, and that all the case manager would have to do is get one person, and then if you want a co-mediator, it's up to you to get somebody and see if they can make it for your time. Because I can see from the case management point of view, I mean, it's hard enough to juggle getting somebody for a case, and then having to do it. You can't do it that day, let me call back the other person. Can they do it that day? So I don't know, you could leave it up to the mediator.
I mean, I think historically it's been about logistics. So, and there are some workarounds.
Could be online also, if you have a thing online saying, we need 2 people for this slot, and just see who will sign up. I mean, it might be easier than a case manager trying to, you know what I mean, start calling, but maybe.
Is it something that opens up more opportunities for CCR to, if you know you're in advance, you've got people that are willing to co-mediate on the stuff that comes into CCR?
Well, I mean, I would assume like with the case you did with Rebecca, I don't know if people just asked, I mean, or did you say they were initiated? I think they just asked, usually, in the past, but maybe it would be helpful now if they know there is a group of people who like to do that. I don't know, how has that worked for you?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if we would get different kinds of cases or more of a certain type of case than we're already getting. I think it would speak well of our standard if we said that we like to offer opportunities for continuing learning, and this is an important sort of that shared learning experience is important to us, and we prioritize that. We want to make sure we're offering the best quality of service to our clients. Therefore, we put 2 people on every single mediation, or something like that. Could be selling more of our services.
And what do people think about it?
I think organizationally you'd be smarter.
Say it just a little louder.
I'm sorry. I think organizationally you'd be smarter to have the case manager point a mediator on a case, and then presumably they are in, and there is a pool of co-mediators, and put it on that mediator to get another co-mediator, but you've got a scheduled date.
Right.
Then you're finding the co-mediator can match the date in, and that makes life a lot easier for everybody on the scheduling side.
I mean, the idea, so I would want to devise something that's kind of not complex on purpose, but I would want for CCR to keep some kind of control so that, let's say we have Cookie signed up for a mediation on Tuesday, and we have 4 cases next week that have no mediators at all. When Cookie calls in, or when I call in to get scheduled for a mediation, I'm not going to tell myself about Cookie's case. I'm going to prioritize that person who's just calling in for one of the ones we don't have a mediator for at all yet. Does that make sense? So we want to steer people toward cases that we don't have any mediators for rather than for co-mediation, so that the 0 mediator cases get priority over the cases that already have
I'm
one
going into the
mediator.
assumption
That makes
you
sense.
have-
So I'd want to build a system that
Yeah.
allows us
So
to
it may
keep
be
that
that
control.
it's not, I mean, I guess one option would be anybody who wants to mediate on any case can have a co-mediator and work that out. Or it might be, if that's, the issue is making sure all the cases are covered, it might be, you know, if there's X number of parties, or it's a multiple parties, or a more complex case, you know, we do want to give this opportunity. So it may have to be judged by, or let's say we needed, there's a new mediator and they need somebody with them on a case.
Sure.
So there may be criteria, I guess is what I'm saying.
Kind of like you would manage the observer stuff. I mean, right now you still do observing, right? I mean, you could
And we
manage
don't,
it sort
not,
of
there's
for
not
the newer
observing for
mediator.
every case.
Right.
But it also could be the same way you say it takes some of the burden off of a mediator to do a co-mediation. It could be that people will volunteer a little bit more than they would have if it's not
That's
quite
possible.
as intense for them, you know, each time. They may not wait as long, you know, between.
Which is, that, I mean, that's a possibility. Somebody may do it a lot more because they feel they can get a lot more
It's support, it's
different
more
experience
mutual.
and support. Other thoughts?
Is it something you think you'd want to do,
Sounds fun.
to try?
I would, yeah.
My-
Anybody in the room identify themselves as a person who are probably not a good candidate for co-mediation?
I'd like
Not a,
It's probably not a good control group.
exactly.
Yeah.
As everyone thinks
For the
control
session.
Yeah.
Trapped into the
You have
idea.
to talk them out of it.
Right.
I was gonna say, I do a lot of co-facilitation workshops. It's just so much richer with 2 people. It's, yeah, you do have to give up a little bit of control. If you're a control freak, it's hard. But otherwise, it's a lot more fun.
I think so, personally.
yeah.
I think it also, I mean, I've been doing this a long time, but with a co-mediation, I'm just more relaxed.
Have you ever had a bad, I mean, it was negative co-mediation experience? I haven't either.
That sounds good.
Yeah, I guess not being kind of on all the time would be a bit of a relief.
Say again?
I said not being on all the time would probably be a little bit of a relief in a mediation.
And I think it's the other thing that if I miss somebody, I mean, somebody else is gonna pick it up. I think that's my thing, I was like, oh my God, did I miss the best question?
Yeah.
And hopefully the
There's
other person's
always
doing
too
it.
much stuff going on for an individual to pick it all up on a running. I mean, if you're a lawyer in a trial, you're just paying attention to the witness and maybe who's deciding the case. You're not paying any attention to the other side, you don't give a damn, you're not, you know, it's really kind of narrow focus. When you're in mediation, you're automatically have a multiplicity, especially if you got lawyers, you got at least 4 people you're looking at all the time while you're trying to attend to actual words that are being said and trying to get all the reactions to that, which can sometimes be the critical thing, is, you know, it just, you can't do it, you know. So
I can
it
think of
helps.
one situation that was tough in co-mediation. We used to work with groups of mentors in the place where I used to work. And so there would be like 4 or 5 of them. And they would work in pairs as mediators, and then the mentor would sort of sit at the other end of the table and might come in once in a while or something. But there was a case once where there was a really major safety issue that they were just missing. It was like it was just like, and so it was my job to really sit out as much as humanly possible. And it ended up, I needed to come in and take over the case. Just needed
There's a
to
gun on the table, doesn't anybody
take
see
it
the gun
over,
on the table?
exactly. It was something that was really, it was big like that. And I think it really, I hadn't set that up with them in advance. And their expectation, they were not expecting me to come in, and I just had to, and they were disappointed about that and understood. But had I set that expectation in advance, I think I would have been in the clear. But in the moment, it was tense, and I think they weren't happy about it. And I mean, they.
Good learning experience for them.
It was a good learning experience for me, because I was, you know, I'll never make that mistake again. So.
I think, I mean, when you're mediating by yourself all the time, you can feel isolated and you don't really, I think, you know, you can get very comfortable in what you're doing. And in some respects that's nice because you're kind of blissfully ignorant of what you're doing not well, maybe. But on the other hand, you know, like it's nice to have, you know, objectively having that other, you know, that experience where you can watch somebody and kind of bounce things back and forth and talk about it afterwards, like in the moment, as opposed to just kind of debriefing with somebody that wasn't there. It's a lot. It certainly takes you further, progress-wise.
I mean, this is probably a terrible question to ask because you're the people who are here, but do you have any a sense of other people you know at CCR and how they would feel about co-mediation? I mean, just
I don't
off the
think
top.
people know about it. It's one of those things that I'm not sure I've ever seen another seminar on co-mediation. All
No,
these
we
years
haven't.
in
I don't
Chicago,
think-
okay?
Oh, in Chicago, you mean, or
Yeah.
here?
Anywhere, even Chicago.
No, actually, you know what, there was one done a long time ago.
Okay, well, you know,
Yeah, very long time.
considering all the brown bags that Judge Goldberg has had, I don't remember anything on
No,
co-mediation.
this was one where, do you know, I don't know if anybody knows the Bloombergs, one is, can't think of their first names anymore, but one is an attorney and one is, and the wife, the husband's an attorney, the wife's a social worker, and they actually do divorce mediation together as a couple. And I think they did a presentation on that, of how they do that.
But it shows how
that was years
unusual
ago.
it is with that, so it's just, even in the mediation community, they,
Yeah, we haven't talked about it.
in the same way that there's very little that's been on this early recon prep thing,
Mhm.
which,
You did it.
well, I've done
You
it a
did
couple
it.
of times, but that's about it, and it's still
Well,
not a.
that's actually an idea for another,
Well, for CCR to
for a
think about.
CCR thing is that
'Cause I
if we
always did
do,
it.
because a lot of CCR mediators in these more complex cases have done prior, like, interviews or whatever
Well, the-
preparation, and I don't think we've ever really.
This
or have we?
CCR example I have with it, I was one of the 3 first divorce fee mediations here. We were all on the same day. The others were very experienced mediators.
Oh.
My case settled, theirs didn't. We all had the identical problem.
Oh.
And we all identically had a wrong idea of what the problem was going to be in those kind of mediations. We didn't realize the problem was, at that time, and I don't know how much things have evolved, was not that there was a ticked-off client who was taking down their lawyer and therefore didn't want to pay the fee. That's not what was going on. In fact, usually it was chiseling for the lawyer, on the lawyer. But it was the lawyer, the professional, was emotional because he was ticked off because it was an attack on his professionalism by not paying him. I did the early recon, found it out on mine. I said, hey, come on, you're getting a freebie accounts receivable collection here. So you know you're going to have to give something away before I walked in. I'm sure that's why mine was successful. The other 2 mediators got totally sandbagged because they had no idea that was what was going on. And of course, we're in a deep hole they didn't get out of. And when we all debriefed afterwards, we, to our surprise, found out I didn't have a unique case. We were all exactly the same. And because there hadn't been, but I, as a matter of course, was always doing as much as I could a early recon where once I found the parties where I was calling them individually to find out, okay, you know, where are you at, so I could have a strategy going in.
And our policy, I just our habit throughout all these years has been, you know, we go into a case cold.
Tabula
You know,
rasa.
just like, you know, here it's a landlord-tenant case, which can be sort of fun itself too, but there may be particular cases that you really need to do the prior preparation.
It again is more resource intensive, which even with volunteers is a problem.
The
But
reason I don't think it would be a problem for, you guys disagree with me, but for volunteers is, I think one reason people like volunteering here is they like the new experiences. It's like, oh, now we're gonna do like some prior interviews, I haven't done that. I mean, it's sort of like, I think people get off on, you know, learning having a new skill. I don't know.
My-
Go ahead.
My instinct is that it would require a new set of skills for the mediators.
Right.
In terms of, you know, I think if I were to do co-mediation, I would like to co-mediate with the same person several times and kind of familiar, because I think it would be hard for me personally to say, okay, I'm going to co-mediate, and then today it's with Joe, tomorrow it's with Bob, and tomorrow it's with Sally.
Yeah.
You know, so I think, you know, I wonder how you can build that into
A
it,
partnership,
where
a
you
little bit of a
where
partnership.
you kind of you kind of experience different people's style, and then you find one person that you really are effective with, and then these partnerships kind of develop.
Right.
In the new co-mediation.
Well, Cookie, you have experience co-mediating with the same person over many, many, many cases. Do you find that the two of you can kind of get into a pattern, or maybe even a rut? You might even
No, because I don't think it's that often that we do it. I mean, if it's once or twice a year, maybe. I mean, it's not that. Maybe it's more than that sometimes. But no, I haven't found that just because I think it hasn't been that often. It's not like it's a weekly thing or a monthly thing. But even when I've done it at my job, we don't do it that much anymore, just because we have too many cases to do that for. But when we've done it, no, I think it's I mean, it could become a rut, or it could be that you establish sort of a rhythm that actually works well.
In terms of finding out information ahead of time, I think it gives the mediator a little more, just some knowledge coming into it, and the more that you can do to feel like you're prepared and have an understanding, it can ultimately be successful. I think we all want that.
But the downside, I mean, having said the positive side, which I think it's a new skill, the downside is, how many mediators would want to spend that time? Because I'm sure doing, your interviews takes a lot of time, so that people would probably self-select themselves out of cases that would need that, I would think, if they don't want to.
To me, it's appealing because it gives it feels like I would be more prepared and sort of have just knowing what I'm getting into a little bit.
I found it to be kind of disconcerting because I'm so used to going in cold that I had a lot of preconceptions about where it was going to go and who was going to be.
That would be the downside.
Yeah. Happily, it turned out completely different than I expected. But as I kind of knew it would, but you're kind of battling that. At least I found myself kind of battling the ideas that so and so is going to be kind of
and that would be the that would be the downside, that you don't all of a sudden sort of prejudge what's going to happen, and then you miss a lot of stuff.
I got to tell you, my experience is I just had one Monday, and for a month, and I tried to do the early recon, and I couldn't get these lawyers to get.
Is everybody picturing him in fatigues, battle fatigues?
In the brush?
Right underneath the bushes.
Yeah, and it was 4 lawsuits, 4 condo associations, and the developer. And I actually had both sets of lawyers in a prior case, similar in the sense that it had those characteristics. And way in advance, I wanted to get a drift of what was going on. I wanted to get on a spreadsheet, what are you actually disputing? Are you agreeing on what you're disputing about? Little quantification, so what's the big deal or not? And really taking a long time to get it. It's getting more and more up to the date, and I'm really getting close to it. So it's like at the end of the week before, I'm getting it. And then I get a bombshell on the morning of Friday before the Monday mediation that I find out the developer in these 3 main units, 3 buildings, and there's one, has ownership of a substantial portion of all the units. So he's on both sides of the case. In fact, he's on the boards of a lot of them. So I'm saying, holy cow, I'm not going to have a pot and work it out because this is a divorce where there's kids. So that ain't going to work at all. Got to totally reorient this to a different way. And as it turned out, I've never had one like it before. And also having a session a month off because our agreement was an agreement of a course of action and a standstill on the lawsuits. And we actually had a board meeting of one of the condo associations in the middle of the mediation because we had 4 out of the 5 board meeting members of both sides that were there. So I was totally, but if I hadn't the Friday before found out that my idea of, okay, so they made a demand of $1 million this, and what's going to be the response?
Somebody changed the whole.
Out the window. Wasn't the way we were going at all, and I wouldn't have had a clue of what was going on. So I could begin to have a strategy.
Because it sounds kind of.
Well, that would have been helpful too. But.
All right. Well, I really appreciate everybody coming.
Thank you.
I do want your feedback. I had printed up evaluations, and then our printer wasn't working, and then didn't get the printer fixed in time. I'll go check it now, but in case they're not there, I'll email them to you tomorrow along with our PowerPoint presentation. Also, more than happy to hear from you over email or phone call or in person and feedback on the session or on this idea. Thanks.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Very impressive.
It has only taken 30-plus years to talk about it.
Can't be that long before I lose again.
I know.
What had happened?
Well, you stayed all the way.
What finally happened?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Well, that was just your complication.
Why does this mean we have to do it? Does mean I'm a car?
Right.
That was the whole idea, just to try it.
That sounds great.
You were going to just stay in for a little bit.
Yeah, but I got it. As everyone else got sucked
Well,
in.
it's
Left a quarter.
the two areas which there really has not been much talk about in general in the whole community is this and early recall.
Yeah, no, I think this sounds like a good idea.
I think it sounds great.
Yeah, I mean, the only trouble with either of them is they're more resource intensive. And that's not an inconsequential topic, but my thing is it's a no-brainer, but for that. I think so. You know, if you're serious in doing it and you figure you're not there just to play patty cake, it's kind of tense and intense. And that's helpful to reduce that. Every combination I've gone through, I've come out a lot less beat up.
Have you guys heard me?
You too?
Have you guys met, I didn't know if this is our new director. I know Mark.
She's a music. We've met before.
Yeah, you didn't text him.
Yeah.
Thank you, it was very good. Yeah, so maybe co-mediation. Good teacher.
Cookie, great job as always. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Oh,
Participating. Thank you. Everything good?
Yeah.
Two areas that I was interested. I don't think that, like I say, I've done it with other people. Even with that guy who was
Acclimating to your
what don't you get to? He still was beneficial overall in mediation. I mean, it was not negative, it was there. I mean, that was curable. Took him out and I said, okay, stop it. You know, get your head right on this. And, you know, it was no loss to the thing. The idea was one of those mediation, you don't lose anything.
I would have fun with it. I just feel, you know,
Oh, of course, because you got someone there, say, oh, that didn't work, you don't have to, how do I restart, how do I screw, well, the other one jumps in.
I know, I like the training in Chicago.
I mean, now my favorite guy to do it was tremendous.
Continuing at sort of like
He's
short form.
a very smart young guy. And, oh, he's like hit home runs sometimes when I've done co-mediation.
stellar group.
The most interesting one, and he was key. I had a mediation of a, it was law division because it was a Goldberg case. It was intellectual property where the plaintiff said this guy had stolen their training things and he wanted to stay in business. And I realized once I saw this, there's no way in hell this thing can get settled unless it's in the form of a relational agreement. So I started out with the plaintiff, the one good idea I had right off the bat, I said to the plaintiff,
Great job you're going to do. We know you're
draft up a reasonable settlement agreement. And we're going to negotiate clause by clause, and this is going to be like a business deal.
Anyway, just
You're going to have to negotiate it, because that's the only way this works. It ain't going to be just the money, it's a question of restrictions. You got to get it all out in language, be prepared to
interesting.
Right. And, but as we got to a clause, and we hit a loggerhead, it was Mitch who came up with a, you know, breakaway way to handle it that I didn't think of at all. And, but for that, you know, I would have sunk it right there. That's right. That's right. You know?
Not more than so, but I think.
Thank you. I'll see you Monday.
I will see you Monday.
CCR.
Union League Club or Standard Group, which one is Union League?
Half of the board appears to be members of the
Out
Standard
there,
Club, and half
there.
appears to be the board of Union League.
We're,
So when I-
it's Sally Drucker of ACR in Chicago, who's the president, so we're.
Oh, Sally
cheering.
Drucker, yeah, she said at the meeting, right, yeah.
Yeah, so that'll be good, so I'll see you on the next.
It's a fun place too.
So in between now and then, let's see, I gotta take, after Dennis appointment tomorrow morning, and a meeting at noon, I'm gonna take a train to get to Lorient, so I can go to a visitation and a funeral the next morning after I see a chiropractor. And then I have a dinner meeting for economic
What'd you
development.
do?
out
What's
there.
wrong with your arm?
I had pinched the nerve or something. I think I did this because the chiropractor will help me out with this.
Oh, God.
Radiates down.
That's.
And I'm gonna win. I'm
Like an
"Oh,
arm
God, I can't
sciatica
do
or
it."
something.
Yeah, that's what it is. At least I don't get the back ones anymore, just the neck one. See you then.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Of course, it was very interesting. I mean, I'm glad to know, I'm glad to know all of this, but I was glad to have the actual time in my evening to stay. It's one of my first scheduled evenings for, since I've started. So,
But this was a nice group.
Yeah, they were.
it is
nice.
a great group.
So what's our next step?
So is this a CLE within CCR?
Is it continuing ed?
Or is it, or do
Yeah.
other people come?
We would allow other people
outside
to
of
come.
CCR? Right.
Not generally.
Not generally, I mean, we
Depends on the
don't
thing.
advertise outside
Yeah,
of
so this is
CCR
like-
people.
yeah.
But let's say Kent or Joe has a mediator friend who really wants to come, like
Yeah.
my inclination is to say absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been, another attitude is, look, this is an exclusive benefit that we offer to our mediators, but I don't think that
I
gets
think
us
it's
very
good.
far.
I think it's good advertising.
Yeah, I think it is too.
Personally.
But that was to answer your question, is because when Max said, oh, come on, and I was like, okay, that's great, and then I thought, well, it's a CLE, and I didn't know if everyone here at CCR, you know, they'd be like, who's this lady, and why is she here? So,
But I really didn't know,
Yeah.
and I didn't know what it
Yeah.
was.
no,
So I'm sorry.
Yeah.